Before we begin, I want you to know something. This story is about a miracle that no doctor could explain. The mother was scheduled for a C-section. The baby was not in the right position. But on the way to the hospital, something unexpected happened. This story has a beautiful ending. Mother and baby are both healthy and safe. These are real pregnancy stories shared with permission, told by a gynecologist who witnessed them. They are for support and education, not medical advice. If you are waiting for your own miracle, please know that hope is never wasted. You are not alone. Let's begin. You know, after 32 years of delivering babies, I thought I had seen every expression a pregnant woman could wear. Joy, terror, exhaustion. That quiet kind of peace that comes only after you felt life move inside you for the first time. But when Amelia walked into my examination room on that Tuesday morning in early spring, she was wearing something I couldn't quite name. She was 23 years old, newly married, and according to her chart, exactly 11 weeks pregnant with her first child. Her husband Michael sat beside her, tall and nervous, holding her hand like he was afraid she might float away. And Amelia smiled. She smiled at every question I asked, at every form I handed her, at every nurse who came in to take her blood pressure. But her eyes kept drifting to the ultrasound machine in the corner, not with excitement, with something closer to dread. I've learned over the years to trust what mothers don't say. Their bodies tell stories their mouths can't speak. And Amelia's body was telling me she had been here before. Not in this room exactly, but in this moment. The moment where hope feels dangerous because you've already learned how easily it can break. Her hands were shaking when she lifted her shirt for the ultrasound gel. Not trembling, shaking. The kind of involuntary movement that comes from somewhere deep in the bones. Michael noticed it too. He leaned over and whispered something in her ear, and she nodded, but her jaw stayed clenched. Have you ever noticed how some women walk into their first appointment carrying an invisible weight? It's not in their medical history. It's not written anywhere in their files. But any doctor who truly pays attention can see it. Amelia was carrying something she hadn't told anyone about. Not her husband. Not her mother. Not the friends who had thrown her a small celebration when she announced this pregnancy on social media, with a picture of tiny booties. I placed the ultrasound wand on her belly, and for a moment, the room was completely silent except for the static hum of the machine. Then it appeared on the screen. A flicker. Small and fast and impossibly alive. That's the heartbeat, I said softly. Amelia didn't cry. She held her breath instead. And I watched as her husband's face broke into the widest smile I had seen in months. But Amelia just stared at that flickering light on the black and white screen, and I knew something had happened before. Something she wasn't ready to name. Sometimes the hardest part of being a doctor isn't delivering bad news. It's recognizing that a woman is carrying a grief so heavy she's forgotten how to put it down. If stories like this touch your heart, you can stay connected for more. What would most mothers feel in that moment, staring at a heartbeat they were terrified they'd never see? After that first appointment, I asked Amelia to stay behind while Michael went to schedule the next visit. I closed the door and sat down across from her, not behind my desk, but in the chair right next to hers. That's something I learned from a mentor years ago. When you want the truth, don't hide behind furniture. Sit beside the fear, not across from it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Amelia stared at her hands folded in her lap, and I noticed how tightly she was gripping her own fingers. White knuckles. The kind of grip women use when they're holding themselves together by sheer force of will. Amelia, I said quietly, you've had a loss before, haven't you? She didn't answer right away. The clock on the wall ticked 7 times before she finally nodded. Just once. A small movement that seemed to cost her everything. 9 months ago, she whispered. I was only 6 weeks. Barely even pregnant. Michael doesn't know. I never told him because I thought if I said it out loud, it would become real. And if it wasn't real, maybe I could pretend it didn't happen. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I watched something shift in her face. That careful mask she had been wearing since she walked through my door began to fracture. She told me she had been alone when the bleeding started. Michael was working a night shift, and she sat on the bathroom floor until sunrise, too afraid to call anyone, convinced that if she just stayed very still, the baby would somehow be okay. But by morning she knew. She cleaned everything herself. Went to work the next day. Never told a single soul. That's the thing about early pregnancy loss that nobody talks about. Women are expected to grieve silently, because the world tells them it wasn't real enough, yet. But the grief is real. The hope that died is real. And carrying that grief into another pregnancy? That's a weight that would break most people. Now she was 12 weeks along, and every cramp made her run to the bathroom to check for blood. Every ultrasound appointment filled her with a terror so complete she couldn't eat the night before. She wasn't excited about this pregnancy. She was surviving it. "There's something wrong with me," she said finally. "Other women have babies easily. They get pregnant and they're happy. Why can't I just be happy?" I reached over and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Amelia, there is nothing wrong with you," I said. "You're not broken. You're just a mother who has already known loss, and that changes how hope feels." She looked at me then with eyes that had been holding back tears for 9 months. And I realized something in that moment. Sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from medicine. It comes from a woman finally saying her secret out loud, and discovering she's still standing. Stories like these stay in people's hearts for a long time. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet if I'm being honest. Amelia came in for her routine checks, smiled when she was supposed to smile, answered my questions, and left. But something was different after that conversation in my office. She had started talking to her baby. She mentioned it almost apologetically during her 16-week appointment, as if she was embarrassed. "I know it sounds silly," she said, her hand resting on the small bump that was finally visible beneath her sweater. "But I tell him good morning every day. And good night. I just want him to know. I want him to know I'm here." I told her it wasn't silly at all. That babies hear their mother's voices long before they see their faces. That those whispered words become the first music they ever know. She smiled at that. A real smile this time. The first one I had seen from her that reached her eyes. But at 24 weeks, everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The kind of gray day where the light outside seems uncertain about whether it wants to break through the clouds. Amelia came alone. Michael had a meeting he couldn't reschedule, and she assured me it was fine. She was getting more confident now, feeling the baby move regularly, letting herself imagine a future that included a nursery and a car seat and a tiny human who would call her mama. I placed the Doppler on her belly to listen to the fetal heartbeat. And I paused. Something was wrong. Normally, a baby's heartbeat at 24 weeks is steady and strong. A beautiful rhythm that sounds like a horse galloping somewhere deep and safe. But what I heard coming through that monitor made my own heart skip. The rhythm was irregular. Not just a little off. It was skipping beats in a pattern that should not exist. Amelia noticed my face before she noticed the sound. Mothers always do. They can't see what the doctor sees, but they can feel the shift in the air. The way the room gets smaller. The way the medical professional stops making small talk and starts focusing entirely on the machine in front of them. "What?" she whispered. "What is it?" I didn't answer immediately. I moved the Doppler to a different position, hoping the placement was just poor, hoping the machine was malfunctioning, hoping anything other than what my training was telling me. But the sound was the same. Irregular. Unsteady. Wrong. "Amelia," I said carefully. "I'm hearing something a little different with his heartbeat. I want to send you for an ultrasound right now. Not because we know anything is wrong, but because we need to see what's happening." Her hand flew to her belly. Protective. Instinctive. The way all mothers reach for their children when danger is near. "Is he okay?" Her voice was barely a breath. "Please. Please tell me he's okay." I couldn't tell her that. Not yet. Not because I wanted to keep information from her, but because I didn't have the answer myself. And standing there, watching her face transform from cautious hope to frozen terror, I felt something I've felt 1,000 times in this job. The helplessness of not knowing. The weight of a mother's trust when you have nothing to give her but more questions. Could any mother truly prepare for something like this? The ultrasound confirmed what I had feared. Amelia's baby boy had what we call a fetal arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat that wasn't just a harmless variation. The electrical signals in his tiny heart were misfiring in ways that could affect how well his heart pumped blood. At 24 weeks, his heart was the size of a walnut. And that walnut was struggling. I sat with Amelia for an hour after the ultrasound, explaining what we knew and what we didn't yet know. Some of these arrhythmias resolve on their own. Some require medication. Some indicate bigger problems with how the heart formed. We would need to monitor closely. Weekly appointments. Fetal echocardiograms. A team of specialists. She nodded through all of it. Asked the right questions. Wrote down the names of the medications I mentioned. But I could see her slipping away. That hard-won hope from the past few weeks was crumbling, and she was retreating back into the silence she had built after her first loss. Michael arrived 45 minutes after I called him. His face was pale when he walked in, and he went straight to Amelia's side without saying a word. Just held her. And I watched as she finally cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she had shed in my office before. These were the kind of sobs that come from somewhere primal. A mother's fear-given sound. But here's what I didn't know that day. Michael had decided something on his drive to the hospital. He had decided to protect his wife from the worst of what was coming. And that decision, made with nothing but love in his heart, would nearly destroy them both. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed that Amelia stopped asking certain questions. She stopped asking about survival rates. Stopped asking about worst-case scenarios. She came to her appointments calm, almost eerily so, and trusted everything I said without pushing for more information. I should have noticed. I should have asked her why she wasn't asking the hard questions anymore. But I was focused on the medical side, the weekly ultrasounds, the medication adjustments, the consultations with pediatric cardiology. I missed what was happening right in front of me. Then one afternoon, a nurse made a mistake. A young nurse who didn't know that Michael had been intercepting the detailed reports. Didn't know that Amelia had been seeing only the edited versions her husband carefully curated. The nurse walked into the examination room and said, "I have the results from the cardiology consult about the possible structural defect." Amelia went completely still. "What structural defect?" she asked. "No one told me about any structural defect." The nurse's face drained of color. And in that moment, Amelia understood. Her husband, the man who held her hand through every appointment, who whispered that everything would be okay, who kissed her forehead and told her to trust the doctors, he had been lying. Not with cruelty, with love. But a lie is a lie, and this one had cut her off from the truth about her own child. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood up, walked past the nurse, and called Michael from the hospital parking lot. Have you ever seen someone go through something emotionally similar? That moment when protection becomes betrayal, even when the intention was pure. Michael arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes. He must have broken every speed limit to get there. I saw them through the window of my office, standing in the hallway, her back against the wall, his hands reaching for her while she flinched away. No words loud enough for me to hear. But their bodies told the whole story. She was hurting. He was begging. And somewhere between them, the trust they had built over 4 years of marriage was bleeding out on the hospital floor. I gave them 30 minutes before I went out to get them. Amelia's eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked like someone who had decided something. Michael looked like someone who had just realized he might lose more than his child. "I need to know everything," Amelia said to me, her voice steady in a way that worried me more than tears would have. "Every single thing you know. Don't leave anything out because you think I can't handle it. Don't protect me. I'm his mother. I have a right to know what's happening inside my own body." So I took them to the ultrasound room, and I showed them everything. The detailed anatomy scan took 90 minutes. I pointed to each organ, each bone, each chamber of that tiny heart, and then I showed them what the cardiology consult had found. A diaphragmatic hernia. It wasn't just the heartbeat anymore. The baby's diaphragm hadn't formed completely, which meant his stomach and part of his liver had migrated up into his chest cavity. Those organs were pressing against his lungs, preventing them from developing properly. His left lung was severely compressed. The right lung was better but still affected. "Amelia, Michael," I said, choosing each word with care. "Your son has a condition that will require immediate surgery after birth. Even with the best care, his lungs may not be strong enough to support him. Some babies with this condition don't survive the first hour after delivery." The room went silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The kind that happens when hope dies and nothing has rushed in to replace it yet. "How bad?" Michael asked. His voice cracked on the second word. "On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad?" I looked at Amelia. She deserved the truth. The whole truth. Without advanced fetal intervention and immediate surgical support after birth, the survival rate is about 50%. With the best possible care in a specialized center, it can be as high as 80%. But Amelia, you're 26 weeks. Your baby's lungs still have time to grow. Not as much as we would want, but some. Every week we keep him inside you is another week of development. Amelia placed both hands on her belly. Her son was moving inside her, completely unaware that the world was already deciding whether he would live or die. "What would you do?" she asked me. "If he was yours, what would you do?" I've been asked that question many times, and I've never been able to answer it. Because every mother is different. Every baby is different. Every kind of love carries its own weight. Do you think hope alone can sometimes keep a mother strong? The next 3 days were the longest of Amelia's life. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. Michael stayed home from work, and they moved through their small apartment like two ghosts sharing the same haunting. She wouldn't let him touch her at first. Not out of anger anymore, but because she didn't know how to be touched when her entire body felt like a battlefield. On the second night, she woke up at 3 in the morning to find Michael sitting in the nursery. He had assembled the crib 2 weeks ago, before the irregular heartbeat, before everything fell apart. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the crib, holding one of the tiny onesies they had bought together. A blue one with a dinosaur on it. "I'm sorry," he whispered when he saw her in the doorway. "I thought I was helping. I thought if you didn't know how bad it could be, you wouldn't be afraid. But you were afraid anyway. You were afraid, and I left you there alone because I was too scared to face it with you." She sat down beside him. Not touching, just close. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "No more lies. Even the ones that feel like love. Especially those." He promised. And for the first time in days, she let him hold her. But the hardest conversation was still coming. At 26 weeks, Amelia had to make a decision that no mother should ever have to make. Continue the pregnancy knowing her baby might suffer and die shortly after birth. Or consider terminating the pregnancy before viability, sparing him from pain but living with that choice forever. She came to my office alone for that discussion. Michael offered to come, but she said she needed to understand it herself first before she could let anyone else help her carry it. I laid out the facts. At 26 weeks, his lungs were severely underdeveloped. Every additional week of pregnancy gave them more time to grow, but there were no guarantees. Some babies with his condition made it to full term and still couldn't breathe on their own. Some were delivered early and fought for every single breath until their tiny bodies simply gave out. "What would his death look like?" she asked. Her voice didn't waver. "If I carry him to term and he doesn't survive, what would that be like for him?" I told her the truth. That we would do everything to keep him comfortable. That he would feel no pain. That his death, if it came, would be peaceful, surrounded by people fighting for him, held by hands that loved him. "And if I end it now," she asked, "what would that be like for him?" I told her that too. That he would feel nothing. That his heart would simply stop. That she would be sparing him from a battle he might not win. She sat in that chair for a long time. Then she put her hand on her belly and felt him move. A small flutter. The kind of movement that had once made her cry with joy. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't be the one who stops his heart. If he's going to leave this world, he's going to leave it fighting. And so am I." She chose to carry him. She chose hope over certainty. She chose the possibility of a miracle over the guarantee of an ending she controlled. Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is let her child have a chance, even when that chance comes with unbearable risk. If moments like this remind you why these stories matter, you can show your support. The next 6 weeks were a waiting game. That's what Michael started calling it. A waiting game where the prize was life itself, and the cost of losing was everything. Amelia came to my office every week for monitoring, sometimes twice a week. We watched that tiny heart struggle and persist. We measured his lungs, hoping for growth that came slower than we wanted. We held our breath every time she walked through the door, wondering if this would be the day her body decided it couldn't wait anymore. And through all of it, Amelia talked to her son. In the waiting room, on the ultrasound table, in the parking garage after appointments. She told him about the world outside, about the spring flowers blooming, about his father's terrible cooking and his grandmother's loud laugh, about the nursery with the dinosaur wallpaper that was waiting for him. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered during one ultrasound, her eyes fixed on his blurry image on the screen. "But I need you to know something. You're not a burden. You're not a mistake. You're my son, and every single day I get to carry you as a gift. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones." I turned away to give her privacy. That's something I've learned in this job. Sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do is pretend she isn't there. At 32 weeks and 3 days, Amelia woke up at 4:47 in the morning. She knew something was wrong before she fully opened her eyes. The cramping wasn't like the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been having for weeks. These were lower, sharper, and when she went to the bathroom, there was blood. She woke Michael with 2 words. "It's time." They drove in silence. Not the comfortable silence of a couple who knows each other well. The terrified silence of people who understand that their whole future is about to be decided in a hospital room. Michael's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Amelia's hand rested on her belly, feeling her son move. Still moving. Still fighting. At the hospital, the monitors confirmed what her body already knew. She was in preterm labor at 32 weeks. Too early for him to be strong, but not too early for him to be born. The neonatal team was paged. The surgical team was alerted. And somewhere between the chaos of nurses and the beeping of machines, Amelia closed her eyes and whispered something. The nurse standing beside her later told me she couldn't make out all the words, but she heard the last sentence clearly. "Please let me hold him, even if it's just once. Please let me hold my son before he has to go." Michael held her hand and pressed his forehead against hers. Neither of them cried. There wasn't time for tears. There was only the race against the clock, the desperate hope that each contraction wasn't stealing air from those tiny lungs, and the prayer that a mother whispered when no one else could hear. Have you ever prayed for something you weren't sure you deserved to ask for? The ambulance was supposed to take Amelia to our hospital's labor and delivery unit. That was the plan we had made weeks ago. The plan where I would be there, where her team knew her history, where we had prepared for every possible complication. But at 5:23 in the morning, a multi-car accident on the interstate changed everything. The paramedics radioed ahead. The road to our hospital was completely shut down. They would have to reroute. Michael was following behind the ambulance in their car, and when he saw the detour signs, something in him cracked. He had been holding himself together for hours. The drive to the hospital, the frantic check-in, the moment they told him he couldn't ride in the ambulance because of hospital protocols. He had swallowed every fear, every scream, every desperate prayer, and now this. A wrong turn. A detour. Another thing beyond his control. He almost missed the turn. The ambulance was disappearing into the early morning light, and he slammed on his brakes, swerving onto a side street he had never driven before. The neighborhood was unfamiliar. Industrial buildings gave way to older homes, then suddenly to something else. A large medical complex he didn't recognize. glass buildings, a helicopter pad, signs he couldn't read because his eyes were filled with tears. Then he saw the ambulance. It was stopped at a security gate, and a guard was leaning into the driver's window. Michael pulled up behind them, his heart pounding, ready to scream at someone to move, to hurry, to understand that his son was coming and every second mattered. The paramedic got out and walked back to Michael's car. His face was strange. Not panicked. Not rushed. Something else. "Sir," he said, "this isn't the hospital we were heading to, but this facility. This is the Regional Fetal Care Center. They have a level 4 NICU and pediatric surgery. I've delivered here before. If your son needs surgical intervention immediately after birth, this is actually where you want to be." Michael stared at him. The words didn't make sense. They had been rerouted, forced off their path, sent somewhere they had never planned to go. "Are you saying," Michael said slowly, "that a wrong turn took us to the exact place our son needs to be?" The paramedic didn't answer. He just pointed to the sign above the entrance. Regional Fetal Care Center, specializing in diaphragmatic hernia repair, neonatal surgical intensive care. Michael started laughing, then crying, then both at once. He called my phone. I was already driving toward our original hospital, preparing to deliver Amelia myself. When he told me where they were, I pulled over to the side of the road. "That's impossible," I said. "That center is 45 minutes from here. There's no way a detour led you there." But Michael was already walking through those glass doors. And somewhere inside that building, in a labor room that hadn't been prepared for her, Amelia was about to deliver a baby boy into the hands of the only surgical team in 3 states specifically trained to save him. Not every miracle happens loudly. Some happen quietly inside hospital rooms that mothers never plan to enter. The delivery happened fast. Too fast for fear. Too fast for second thoughts. Amelia was already fully dilated when they wheeled her into the operating room at the Regional Fetal Care Center. She didn't have time to look around at the unfamiliar faces, the different equipment, the strange ceiling tiles she had never memorized during prenatal visits. All she had time to do was push. And then he was there. At 6:41 in the morning, on a day that had started with blood and terror and a wrong turn that turned out to be the only right path, James Michael was born. But he didn't cry. That's the first thing every mother listens for. That first cry. That proof that the baby inside her has become a baby in the world. Breathing, alive, present. James came out silent. His tiny body was blue. Not the purple blue of a baby, who just needs a moment to catch his breath. The gray blue of a baby whose lungs cannot do what lungs are supposed to do. The surgical team moved like a single organism. One nurse whisked him to the warming table. Another placed a breathing tube. A third began chest compressions. The neonatologist, a woman with silver hair and steady hands, called out numbers that Amelia didn't understand. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, APGAR scores that were too low to say out loud. 1 minute, someone said. James still wasn't breathing on his own. The machine was doing the work for him, pushing air into lungs that were too compressed by displaced organs to expand properly. 3 minutes. His heart was beating. That was something. That tiny walnut-sized heart, the one that had misfired and struggled and kept going anyway, was still trying. 5 minutes. Amelia couldn't see him from where she lay. Michael was standing by the warming table, his face hidden from her, but she could see his shoulders shaking. She couldn't tell if he was crying or praying. Maybe both. 7 minutes. The silver-haired doctor looked at her team and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Then she adjusted something on the breathing tube, changed the pressure, the angle, something. 9 minutes. And then, a sound. Small and weak and strangled, but unmistakable. A cry. It wasn't the lusty wail of a healthy newborn. It was thin and reedy, and it sounded like a kitten who had been fighting for its life. But it was a cry. His cry. James Michael had taken a breath. Not on his own exactly. He was still connected to the machine. But his tiny body had remembered how to try. 11 minutes. His color began to change. Gray-blue faded to pinkish gray. Then slowly the pink began to win. 13 minutes. The silver-haired doctor looked up at Michael and nodded. Just once. But that nod said everything. He was alive. He was fighting. And now they had to rush him into surgery before his unstable lungs gave out again. The team moved as one, wheeling the warming table toward the double doors of the operating room. Michael grabbed James's tiny hand through the porthole of the transport incubator. His whole hand covered his son's entire arm. "Don't give up," Michael whispered. "You hear me? Don't you give up." And then they were gone. The doors swung shut. And Amelia lay alone in a delivery room, her body empty, her arms aching, her ears still searching for a cry that had already faded into the hallway. 13 minutes. That's how long her son went without a true breath of his own. What would you have done in her place? Lying there with nothing but silence and faith. The surgery lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of Amelia lying in a hospital bed, her body exhausted but her mind refusing to rest. She had been stitched and cleaned and moved to a postpartum room on the 4th floor. A room with empty arms and a bassinet that would stay empty for days. Maybe weeks. Maybe forever. Michael came to her twice during those 4 hours. Once to tell her they had made the first incision. Once to tell her James was tolerating the anesthesia better than expected. But his eyes told a different story. They were red and wild and full of a fear that had no bottom. At 10:47 in the morning, the silver-haired surgeon came to find them. She was still in her scrubs, and there was a small stain on her sleeve that Amelia couldn't stop staring at. Blood. His blood. "We were able to repair the hernia and return his organs to the correct position," the surgeon said. "His left lung is more damaged than we hoped. He'll remain on the ventilator for at least 2 weeks. Possibly longer. The next 72 hours will tell us whether his lungs can sustain him without the machine." Amelia heard the words. She understood them, but they felt like they were happening to someone else. Someone in a movie. Someone whose life wasn't actually hers. She asked the only question that mattered. "Can I see him?" The surgeon hesitated. Just for a second. But Amelia saw it. "Visitors are allowed in the NICU," the surgeon said carefully. "But I need you to prepare yourself. He has tubes and monitors. His chest isn't fully closed. We left a temporary patch to allow for swelling. He won't look like the babies you see in pictures." Amelia stood up. Her legs were still weak from delivery. She hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. But she walked to that NICU door on her own 2 feet, and she didn't stop walking until she was standing beside the incubator that held her son. He was so small. That was the first thing she noticed. Not just small for a baby. Small in a way that made her wonder how something so tiny could possibly contain everything she loved. His skin was translucent, almost purple in places. Tubes came from his mouth, his nose, his chest, his tiny hands. Monitors beeped and blinked around him like a constellation of worry. But his eyes were closed, and his chest was rising and falling. Not on his own. The machine was doing it, but rising and falling all the same. She reached through the porthole and touched his foot. Just one finger. His skin was warm, alive. Hers. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mama's here." A night nurse found Amelia still sitting beside that incubator at 3 in the morning. The same position. The same finger touching the same tiny foot. She hadn't moved in 14 hours. The nurse was an older woman named Margaret who had worked in NICUs for 30 years. She pulled up a chair and sat beside Amelia without asking. "I'm going to tell you something," Margaret said quietly. "And I want you to listen. Not as a nurse. As a mother who sat right where you're sitting 22 years ago." Amelia looked at her. Margaret's eyes were kind and tired and full of a knowing that only comes from having survived the unsurvivable. "My daughter was born at 26 weeks, Margaret said. "She weighed 1 pound, 14 ounces. They told me she might not make it through the night. I didn't sleep for 3 months. But she's 22 years old now. She's studying to be a doctor. And every single day, I thank God I stayed." Margaret reached over and squeezed Amelia's hand. "Your son isn't done fighting. And neither are you. But you have to rest. He needs you to rest. because when he wakes up, and he will wake up, he's going to need his mother to have enough strength to hold him. Amelia looked back at James. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the machine. Steady, patient, alive. She had never loved anything the way she loved this tiny, broken, fighting boy. 21 days. That's how long James lived in that incubator before Amelia finally got to hold him. 21 days of watching monitors and counting breaths and learning the language of beeps and alarms. 21 days of touching his tiny feet through plastic portholes and singing songs he couldn't hear over the ventilator. 21 days of hope and fear tangled so tightly together that she stopped trying to separate them. The extubation happened on a Thursday. James had been breathing over the ventilator for 3 days straight, taking his own breaths in between the machine's pushes. His lungs weren't perfect. They might never be perfect, but they were enough. The silver-haired surgeon stood beside his incubator and said the words Amelia had been praying for since the moment he was born. Let's see what he can do on his own. They removed the breathing tube at 9:17 in the morning. For one terrible moment, James's oxygen saturation dropped into the 70s. Amelia held her breath. Michael gripped the railing of the incubator so hard his knuckles turned white. And then James coughed. A tiny, wet, pathetic cough. And his numbers climbed. 80, 85, 90, 92. He was breathing. On his own lungs, his own effort, his own stubborn, miraculous will to live. The nurses stepped back. Margaret, the night nurse who had stayed long past her shift to be there for this moment, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and the surgeon looked at Amelia and nodded. Would you like to hold your son? Amelia's legs almost gave out. Michael caught her elbow and steadied her as they led her to a chair beside the incubator. The nurses opened the porthole and lifted James out with hands so gentle they seemed to be handling something made of glass and miracles. They placed him against Amelia's bare chest, skin to skin, the way it should have been 21 days ago. And James opened his eyes. They were dark, almost black, the kind of newborn eyes that haven't decided what color they want to be yet. But they found his mother's face immediately. Newborns can't see clearly. Their vision is blurry at best. But James stared at Amelia with an intensity that made her catch her breath. He knew her. Not her face. Her voice. Her smell. The heartbeat he had listened to for 32 weeks inside her body. Babi. Amelia whisperat. Her voice cracked on the second word. Hi, my beautiful boy. James's hand, his impossibly small hand, still bruised from IVs, still fragile from everything his body had survived, reached up and curled around Amelia's finger. Not a reflex. A choice. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers and held on like he was saying, I'm here. I made it. And I'm not letting go. Michael knelt beside the chair and pressed his forehead against Amelia's shoulder. All three of them together. Finally. After the fear and the silence and the wrong turns and the 13 minutes without a breath. After the surgery and the waiting and the 21 longest days of their lives. Amelia looked up at me standing in the doorway. I had driven 45 minutes to be there for this moment. And for once in my career I had no medical words to offer. No advice. No diagnosis. No prognosis. I just stood there and watched a mother hold her son for the first time. And I thought about every mother I had ever treated. Every woman who had walked into my office carrying invisible weights. Every pregnancy that had gone wrong and every pregnancy that had somehow, against all odds, gone right. Every mother who had chosen hope when certainty would have been so much easier. James Michael is 4 years old now. He has asthma and a scar across his chest that he calls his fighter mark. He loves dinosaurs and his father's terrible cooking and climbing trees that make his mother's heart stop. He runs slower than the other kids and tires faster than they do. But he runs. He lives. He laughs. And every year on his birthday, Amelia sends me a photograph. Last year's showed him wearing a Superman cape, standing in front of a birthday cake with 3 candles, his arms raised in victory. On the back of the photograph, she had written 5 words. Thank you for believing in us. I keep that photograph in my office. Not because of what I did. The medicine, the monitoring, the medical knowledge I spent 30 years learning. I keep it because it reminds me of something I almost forgot during those long, hard decades of this work. Mothers are the real miracle. They carry life inside bodies that sometimes fail them. They love children they haven't met yet. They choose hope when hope seems foolish. They sit beside incubators for 21 days. They whisper prayers into the silence. They hold on. And sometimes, if they're very lucky and very brave, their tiny babies reach up and hold on right back. You know, people always ask me what the hardest part of my job is. They expect me to say the long hours or the difficult deliveries, or the conversations where I have to tell a mother that her baby won't survive. And those things are hard. They break something in me every single time. But the hardest part is something else entirely. It's watching mothers carry grief silently because the world has taught them that their pain isn't big enough yet. It's seeing women blame themselves for losses they couldn't have prevented. It's knowing that so many mothers are sitting in waiting rooms right now, holding their breath, terrified to hope. So here's what I want you to remember. You are not broken. Your body is not your enemy. And hope, fragile, terrifying, unreasonable hope, is never a waste. Even when the road takes wrong turns. Especially then. Because sometimes the wrong turn leads exactly where you needed to go. And sometimes the babies who shouldn't survive are the ones who fight the hardest. Not every miracle happens loudly, but they happen. Every single day. In hospital rooms and delivery rooms, and the quiet spaces between a mother's heartbeat and her child's. They happen. And so can you.